It is looking increasingly more likely by the hour that the Israeli government may have to leverage the nuclear option, also known as the Samson option, as conditions deteriorate across the many fronts. We are talking about Israeli forces being pushed back in Gaza City, the war on the border with Lebanon heating up, the Yemenis who have apparently commandeered a commercial vessel that is owned by an Israeli individual, but that's really neither here nor there who owns it, because this declaration, this holding for ransom, this commercial vessel is essentially going to force Israel's hand in this conflict in some way, shape, or form. Now, that is just the tip of the iceberg. Apparently, we got American troops in there. According to a very credible Arabian news source, American troops are on the ground protecting Israeli nuclear facilities. Now, the question is, are they protecting these facilities? Are they there to prevent the Israelis from using them? Or are they there to help the Israelis utilize and execute their Samson nuclear triad option when the time comes? Now, I haven't done a video in 72 hours, but I'm constantly aggregating info in the background, and I can tell you nothing really speaks and provides perspective on how fast the situation is devolving when I don't do a video for just 48 to 72 hours. And I see the culmination of all of this data that I now have to try to condense into a 30-minute compendious presentation. I'm going to do my best to do that, but no promises. But you just see how much has transpired in just a few days across the many war theaters, be it in the Baltic states, the shuttering of borders with Russia between Finland and all the Baltic states, the amount of casualties in the Ukraine-Russia conflict just in the last 24 hours alone is in the thousands, guys. So this situation is getting wildly out of control. We still have incursions into Taiwanese airspace by the Chinese. Don't be fooled by the smoke and mirror theatrics of Biden meeting Xi Jinping. They're not buying that, okay? And why would they at this point in time when clearly the aggressor in this situation, from their perspective, is the United States, who's building military bases all around China's border. They're not fooled by whatever it is that Biden is trying to do to salvage relations at this point in time. The Chinese are going to make their move when the time is right. And right now, it appears as though Israel is being left with very few options. Now, what has transpired just in the last few hours, just like we said a week ago, and we distinctly said this, that around the Arabian Peninsula, one of the biggest threats, and I don't have a map here today, too preoccupied in the warehouse trying to get people's order out before the 0 day arrives, but you might have to use Google Maps for this if you don't know what I'm talking about. The Arabian Peninsula is comprised of Yemen, all the Emirate states, the Arab states, and the Saudi Arabia, Oman, all those countries, okay? And you have these waterways, the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf. They are what connect to the Suez Canal. You remember last year when that ship was turned on its side and it created all the commotion, and it basically caused global shipping in that region to come to a standstill. We're talking about the backing up of thousands of ships. Well, what we're going to see now, that could have just been an appetizer, because what the Houthis have done here, the Houthis who have targeted the U.S. drone, they've targeted a U.S. warship, they've targeted the Israelis with ballistic missiles, and yet there has been no response. The question is, why hasn't there been a response? Well, this may be part of the reason. Now, they've went one step further, and they're basically holding the world for ransom. And this may force Israel's hand in some way, shape, or form. Israel, who has very few options, because on the one hand, they have domestic unrest. Their population is pissed off. Netanyahu's popularity is at an all-time low. They got people beaten on their northern border, people beaten on the Golan Heights Syrian border, people beaten in Hamas border, in Jenin, in the West Bank, Jordan moving military equipment towards the border, Egypt moving military equipment towards the border, and they got the Yemenis launching missiles left and right, commandeering vessels. I would hate to be Netanyahu right now. Understand, this is why they may have to utilize that Samson option, but all it's going to do is just kick a hornet's nest and rile it up even more. So we have the Houthis taking this ship hostage. What this is going to do is going to put immense amount of pressure on Netanyahu to either come to some sort of reconciliation with Hamas, some sort of peace settlement, some sort of negotiation, because the Houthis, in doing this, are going to elevate shipping prices. They're going to now force a lot of these ships to have armed escorts. We're talking about hundreds, if not thousands of ships. That's going to immensely increase the cost of shipping. It is going to increase insurance premiums on a lot of these vessels, and they could just outright close the entire strait, from which hundreds of vessels pass through every single day. Goods, I should add, that Israel also needs. They are a recipient of. A lot of their energy is going to come from this region. Now, the ship in question that was taken hostage is a Turkish, was coming from Turkey, I believe, to India. And there's so many hands in this pot. I mean, apparently it's under Japanese lease, but it's an Israeli-owned vessel. All of the crew, it's a multinational crew, so we're talking about Ukrainians, Filipinos, just a mishmash of different people who are on board this vessel, Bulgarians, Mexicans, and so that's not really the issue. It really doesn't even matter. It doesn't even have to be an Israeli vessel, to be brutally honest, because what this is going to do in increasing the cost of shipping, it's going to mean that they might have to take the long way around. They might just have to close the Red Sea to shipping, in spite of the fact that you have a U.S. warship there right now, which is yet to act. And it begs the question, why hasn't U.S. warships attacked Yemen yet? There has to be a reason. Are they hoping that the Houthis do this in order to escalate, to provide justification to have all those warships there in the first place? I'm going to leave that up to you to speculate, but here is what they're saying. They're saying that they are going to target, either attack or commandeer, any ship carrying the flag of what they call the Zionist entity, i.e. Israel, any ships operated by Israeli companies with cargo for or intended for Israel or coming from Israel, or ships owned by Israeli companies. They are demanding that the withdrawal of all citizens working on the crews of these ships, avoid shipping on or handling on these vessels, and inform your ships to stay away from these ships because we may commandeer them. Okay? So this is a massive escalation, guys. I can't quite express that point enough, that this is going to have huge repercussions. And this is one ship. Now imagine, we're going to see what effect this has on the markets tomorrow. The markets are bipolar at best, so they might not even be fazed by this at this point in time. It's really difficult to say what the outcome of this is going to be, but this is foreshadowing what could potentially happen if we're looking at a closure of the Strait of Hormuz. If the United States goes to war with Iran, which it appears as though the groundwork is being set for reasons I'm going to get into in just a minute. But if they close the Strait of Hormuz, if they close that strait that leads into the Red Sea, and for whatever reason there's very little activity in the Suez Canal because it's coming out the other side on the southern portion of the Red Sea, then this is going to cause massive disruptions in the global supply chain. It is going to cause an increase in prices. Of course, the Fed is trying to combat inflation. The only way they can do that is if everything runs smoothly. So because a lot of economic contraction is already underway, this could be that straw that breaks the global economies back, okay? And this is what nobody wants to have happen right now, which is why there's going to be a lot of pressure on the Israeli government. Now, Israel is not just blaming Yemen. They're, in fact, blaming Iran. We have to ask ourselves, is Iran the orchestrator of all of this activity? Iran is saying that these entities, the Yemenis, the Iranian-backed militias in Syria, in Iraq, Hamas, the guys fighting in Jenin in the West Bank against Israel, Hezbollah, they're saying that everybody's acting independently. But when you really start to look at it, it really starts to look that this is a concerted effort by all of these groups. Maybe they're just communicating telepathically because they're clearly working together to diminish and attrit the Israeli conventional capability to respond. Not only that, when you have a dominant power in the region like the Israelis or the Americans, they're dominant because they have superior technology. Superior technology costs a lot of money. Those missiles, those Iron Dome defense systems that have been depleted over the last 6 weeks have cost a lot of money, and they're being depleted by $500 rockets. Hezbollah has only launched 1,000 of its estimated 150,000 rockets and drones, and arguably they're saving their best stuff for when the war really goes vertical on that front. So Israel is blaming Iran. Now, as I said, U.S. troops are allegedly military advisors, according to a very reputable Arabian news source, in the occupied part of Palestine to control and protect, they call it Palestine, of course, control and protect Israeli nuclear facilities in the Dimona and Tebna desert region. About 2,000 U.S. Army personnel arrived, and they're saying that their central preoccupation is to guard these facilities. Okay, now keep that in mind, because now we're going to talk a little bit about the Iranian nuclear linchpin. This could be the trigger for World War III, at least as it starts in the Middle East. We're going to talk about Russia in a minute. There's a shitload of stuff that's been going on up there in terms of nuclear exchanges. France doing new tests of new types of nuclear weapons, interceptions with bombers, borders being shuttered, Russia deploying all kinds of nuclear weapons. It is getting crazy up there. But this could be the trigger for war with Iran. Get a load of this. Now, recall that recently Congress passed House Resolution 559. That stipulates that the U.S. would support a military invention by the United States and Israel to halt Iranian nuclear enrichment if they thought that the risk of Iran getting a nuclear weapon was real. Now, according to International Atomic Energy Agency officials, they've complained that Iran was refusing to certify several of its inspectors, including French and German citizens, while continuing to produce highly enriched uranium. This is a story that just came out today, okay? The Iranian government withdrew the inspectors' accreditation as retaliation for what it called political abuses by the U.S., British, and German governments. So, since they've expelled these inspectors, they've continued, or at least theoretically continued, to enrich uranium. There's no oversight currently, as the JCPOA deal has basically all but withered on the vine. Iran's stance is not unprecedented, but is not only unprecedented, I should say, but unambiguously contrary to the cooperation that is required, wrote the IAEA head, Rafael Grossi. So we are seeing now all the pieces being moved in position. You have all the U.S. warships in that region. You have the excuse that now whatever the Yemenis are doing is being orchestrated by the Iranians, who, according to the IAEA, are not nuclear compliant. And this, of course, now on the basis of House Resolution 559, which was just passed, provides them every justification they need when the time is right to go to war with Iran. Now, they still have this massive problem in Gaza City, because apparently, and I mean, these guys in Gaza, this is looking like a scene out of the Terminator, okay? Only the machines, of course, are the IDF, and the humans who are resisting are the Gazans. Now, you know, you could spin that metaphor however you want. That's just the scenes that I'm looking at. You're looking at a superior, technologically superior fighting force in every possible way, getting wrecked by asymmetrical, just guerrilla-style tactics out of these tunnels. And it's getting almost to the point where, you know, they might just, once they evacuate all the civilians out of there, they might just detonate some sort of underground nuke on those tunnels. Because what other option are they really going to have other than just throwing, you know, hundreds of, and for Israel, which is a lot of soldiers, hundreds, possibly thousands of casualties, if they're being routed in some areas, as reports are indicating, then that's a bad sign, considering they still have to deal with Hezbollah on that front, who has far more sophisticated technology. They have to deal with the Iranian-backed militias who've been targeting Erbil military base, U.S. bases across the Middle East. Probably 60 attacks now in the last 6 weeks. So we know that things are escalating, and it costs a lot more for the United States and Israel to wage a war than it does these groups. And as I've always said, when you run out of conventional weapons, the only option you are going to have is the nuclear ones. And nuclear weapons are already bought and paid for. And when you're coming up against, new budget cuts and all the rest, and you have to produce all these conventional munitions, and you don't even have the industrial capacity to do so, those 2,000 or 200 or however many nuclear weapons they have that are just sitting there collecting dust start to look very enticing. According to the Iranian foreign minister, he says that we are witnessing the first stage in the expansion of the scope of the war in Gaza through resistance groups that decide on their own, quote, quote, to support Palestine. We are seeing internet outages in numerous countries, including Iran. While they might be short-lived, these are unprecedented. These are clearly, I shouldn't say clearly, but they are very likely cyber related. Okay, so we're seeing cyber attack stuff. There's rumors about a possible ceasefire taking place. My take on this ceasefire situation is this. I think what they're going to do is, if they do create some ceasefire condition where they're allowing hostages to be freed, I think up to 50 hostages, women and children, older people with who are infirm, then what's going to happen possibly is, because remember, we're talking about Israel, they have the Hannibal Doctrine, or they did up until 2017, which was basically a utilitarian concept that the good of Israel as a whole should not come at the expense of individual lives. So if a soldier was being hauled away and your sniper had him in his sights, and he was being hauled away by the enemy, and he was going to divulge the secrets of the state, possibly by being tortured, you take him out. Okay, that was kind of the philosophy. I'm not saying that happened. I'm just saying that was their actual doctrine. It's called the Hannibal Doctrine. You can go and look it up on Wikipedia. Now, the question is, are they willing to sacrifice the hostages living there for the sake of what they might perceive as the greater goal of Israel as a whole, the existence of Israel as a whole? Now, what I think is going to happen with this 5-day ceasefire, I don't think it stands a chance of being upheld by either side when you really think about the conditions on the ground, okay? This would require that the Israelis potentially pulled back, and that they're saying this is going to be monitored by aerial surveillance. But are they really going to allow these urban guerrilla fighters to gain a bigger foothold? Are they going to be able to resist, seeing somebody and seeing some activity and not acting on it militarily on both sides? You know what I mean? I just can't see a ceasefire in this particular conflict being able to hold up. And I think that's the whole point, is that they're going to say, okay, we're going to do the ceasefire, and it's not going to work. And then they're going to say, okay, well, we tried the ceasefire, and Hamas X, Y, and Z, so now we can no longer trust them. So now we rule that out from ever being a possibility again in the future. At least that's what I think, okay? Situation domestically across the board, whether it's in Jordan, Syria, Iran, all these Middle Eastern countries, is not good. You have a lot of protests emerging, even in countries like Iran, who are wanting the leadership there to do more on the part of the Palestinians. There's pressure building up, not so much in Saudi Arabia, where it's all about the money, but in other countries where they're more theocratic in nature and not royal, or monarchies, I should say. They're more theocracies. They are calling on their leaders to do more. There was a billboard of the leader of the, I forget his name off the top of my head, but the Iranian government, the president of the Iranian government, burning. Okay, so they're burning murals of him, obviously in protest of the apparent lack of doing anything about it, even though many people do think that the orchestrating hand behind a lot of these scattered, seemingly decentralized attacks are the Iranian government. So I guess time will tell, but this is putting pressure on the Jordanian government as well. They're moving military equipment in and around the West Bank border, because the West Bank, if you haven't been paying attention, is, I don't know, like 20 times the size of the Gaza Strip, and it is starting to become incredibly destabilized. There was people forget, just a couple weeks ago, there was an assassination attempt on Mahmoud Abbas, the president of, or whatever they call him there. I'm not sure if he's referred to as a president, but the leader of the Palestinian Authority, okay? And since that time, there's been numerous bombardments. There's been caterpillars in there tearing up the roadways, armored vehicles coming under attack, street battles, the whole 9 yards. So the situation is getting out of control there. So Israel is trying to put out that fire. They're trying to put out the fire in Gaza City. And now Lebanon is on the brink of escalating vertically. There's been so much crossfire there in the last 24 hours. It's impossible to effectively, meaningfully condense in such a short period of time. But know that the situation is escalating wildly out of control. And yeah, that's what's going on. And it appears as though this commercial vessel thing is going to throw a wrench. This is I think many of us, we think that World War III is just going to be nuclear weapons. But there are so many asymmetrical angles to how World War III plays out by virtue of the fact that we live in a globalized, interconnected, multinational world. It's not like it was in World War II, where maybe a handful of investors owned a certain company and a lot of things were just nationalized. There was very little international trade, not on the scale as there is now. There was not these scattered supply chains because there wasn't an efficient logistical system to make it financially lucrative for you to have different parts coming out of different countries and all this stuff. So this creates a lot of problems. It's not as complicated as China's going to go to war with the United States. China has a lot of U.S. Treasury notes that they still have to offload. If they do it all right away, everybody panics and runs for the door at the same time and the shit hits the fan. They can't do it. You got to time release these things. It's a very, very tangled web we weave, and we're going to be doing a video specifically on all of the asymmetrical components to World War III, be they cyber attack, be they attacks on commercial vessels, kinks in the supply chain, biological attacks. You know, the list goes on and on. But this is going to be a factor. Even just, guerrilla-style attacks on critical infrastructure, sleeper cells. We're going to see a lot more of that. Now, moving up to what's going on in the Russo-Ukraine war theater, things are heating up there rapidly. And I just want to give you guys a heads up before I move on any further, that we are currently have our Black Friday sale. It's active, 15% off, store-wide. I don't do drop shipping. I don't outsource labor to other foreign countries. God bless them, but I want everything to be centralized. I'm paranoid. I'm a prepper. I like to micromanage everything. So that's why we keep everything in-house. We only drop ship maybe 2 or 3 items. So, and the products that we sell are top-notch. I don't sell crap. I don't want people to open up that can of food when the apocalypse comes and is cursing my name when they have to take a bite out of what tastes like dog food, which I assure you, a lot of these companies, they could give a shit about how their food tastes. They just want you to store it in a closet and hopefully you never eat it. And when you do finally eat it, it's too little, it's too late. And but the products that we sell, premium, top notch. I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to do it because, with the automation that Amazon is utilizing nowadays, it's likely it's going to make this not a lucrative industry at this point in time. But we're still doing it for the time being. Anyways, 15% off store-wide with the exception of some of the bigger items that cost a lot to ship, like the freeze-drying machines and some of our larger tents and things like that. But go capitalize on that while the getting is good. Well, supplies last, as you can see. We are stocked up on food for this particular sale. We're passing on the distributor sales to you as much as we possibly can, okay? Now, Eastern European countries are currently shuttering their borders. This might mean that the writing is on the wall for the war in Ukraine. Is the Ukrainian lines about to collapse? I personally don't think so. I still think there's an element of misdirection here that is currently taking place. I do still think that if NATO is even just a little bit of a chess player, they might see the value in downplaying their capabilities at this point in time. Apparently, the Ukrainians have established a minor foothold on the left bank of the Dnieper River, which is quite telling. You're also seeing a lot of videos coming out with Russian soldiers just doing very strange things, like, forcing guys to the front line. Like, they're doing this on both sides. Don't get me wrong. Mobilization in Ukraine is really ugly right now. People are resisting it. There's fights with the conscriptors. And, they're putting up fights. You got pregnant women flying drones on the front lines. It's an ugly situation, but it's not looking good on the Russian side of things either. In Avdiivka, apparently they've lost 1,100 troops in the last 24 hours. If Israel lost 1,100 troops in 24 hours, they would have nuked Gaza by now, okay? If you look at proportionately, when you look at the fact that 600 children have died since the Ukraine war started, almost 2 years now, and you have 4,000 to 5,000 children already died in Gaza, the proportionality of the response would be likely utilizing the Samson option if the attritional rate was that severe. So I'm just saying, I know a lot of people think, oh, it's over, the gig's up for Ukraine. I don't think so yet, guys. I think there's still more to this conflict. But what we are starting to see now is the Baltic states and NATO execute Plan B. What is Plan B? Plan B is the fortification of the Baltic states, the Baltic Sea, Finland, who is shuttering its borders, Estonia, who's also installing anti-tank barriers on the eastern border. We know Poland's been doing the same on the Belarusian border. They're down to one very tightly controlled border crossing there. We have the encirclement of Kaliningrad, the fortification and the amassing of brigades of troops on a division of troops. I can't even keep all this stuff in my head, guys, of Polish troops towards the Belarusian border. Of course, we have HIMARS overseeing the Suwalki corridor that links Kaliningrad with Belarus. We have 3 aircraft carriers, all belonging to European countries, in the Baltic Sea. The French have just done a new test of a new nuclear missile. They didn't actually test the nuke, obviously, but it's capable of carrying 10 nuclear warheads, obviously signaling to Russia that it's not only the United States and their F-35 tactical nukes that they're going to have to contend with, as well as Great Britain, whatever they have left, but they're also going to have to contend with the French. We have the Finland. Right now, there's what they're calling a manufactured migrant crisis. I don't know if this is just justification to harden the border there, but understand what's happened now that Finland has joined NATO. Basically, you have NATO troops just a few kilometers from St. Petersburg, one of Russia's largest cities. You have Germany establishing a greater NATO presence in the Baltic countries, getting ready this combat readiness force, to redeploying Patriot missile batteries out of Poland, who's already been heavily armed up by the United States in the last couple of years. So this appears to be Plan B that is currently underway within that region. And we have a lot of nuclear drills going on. So Russia recently conducted a nuclear drill with supersonic bombers just north of the Shetland Islands today, which is around the UK. Newly released photos show White Swan bombers, Tupolev Tu-160s and Tu-22M3s that were doing this exercise for 13 hours, okay? We also have Russia loading its avant-garde intercontinental ballistic missile system, which is a hypersonic glide vehicle, which they claim is invulnerable to any missile defense. They were seen loading that. They're about to do the longest range test of the Sarmat RS-28 Satan missile ever conducted. It's going to be 15,000 miles, I believe. Is it miles or kilometers? Excuse me, possibly kilometers. But they're going to be shooting it into the Pacific. Obviously, there's not going to be a nuclear warhead on it. They're also now putting the actual Satan missile system, the RS-28 Sarmat, on experimental combat duty. So it's on combat duty, which is saying a lot, that they're putting it on combat duty while it's still in its experimental phase. It's kind of like where the F-35 is, I suppose, but not quite as advanced, obviously, because it's still, just off the press, basically. So the fact that they are rushing that out so quickly, in light of everything else that has transpired, right now, we could write an encyclopedia on this stuff, just the stuff that's happened in the last 3 months. We also are seeing more attacks on Moscow in the last 24 hours. Drones being shot down towards Moscow, deep inside Russian territory. And Zelensky is saying that a massive bombardment on their critical infrastructure grid is about to occur in, of course, the run-up to winter, that the Russians are about to start their winter bombing campaign. We also have a Ukrainian grain ship for the first time hit by a sea mine. Those same mines that we warned you were dropped by the Russians just a few weeks ago. So this is going to, once again, increase global shipping rates. It's going to increase the price of food. I would not be surprised if we've seen a spike in oil and food prices in the coming week ahead. But the way this market just makes no sense, I don't count on it. Like I said, we have Sarmat entering full combat duty, and we have Norway scrambling to intercept Russian bombers who were flying close to NATO airspace. Now, this is something which is routine. It happens a lot. There's been a lot of what they call emergency action messages as of recent. Typically, these are messages that are sent out indicating they could be exercises, but a lot of people think that they indicate a DEFCON level emergency of sorts. There's been a lot of that happening. Clearly, we're at a much higher elevated DEFCON level, in spite of the fact that people think that Xi Jinping and Biden are having a baby together. I regret to inform you that that's all smoke and mirrors. The Chinese don't believe that. The Chinese see what's going on. How can they not? How can they not see that while they were fighting the Russians and while the United States and Ukraine seemed to have the upper hand, they were trash-talking China. They were, sending dignitaries there. They haven't forgotten what happened last year with Pelosi going to Taiwan and these military contracts. I mean, come on. The building of military bases in the Philippines, the sending nuclear submarines to South Korea. Don't be, a lot of people really think that they're that stupid. They know that we can't be trusted. So they're playing along is what they're doing right now. All right, so that is what's going on in that theater. Now, again, we do have the most amount of incursions into Taiwanese airspace in 2023, bar none, up until this point in time, and we still have about a month and a half to go. We have numerous other asymmetrical style tactics that are coming into play in that particular theater that we're going to go in greater depth in a future video, because this is a fascinating topic to me, because a lot of people like myself have up until, just the last few months really realized that World War III isn't just about nuclear weapons. There are many different components to this. And yes, while that is the final play and the final act, there are many things in the run-up to that, okay? Apparently, a Chinese warship was sending out sonar pulses which injured Australian naval personnel recently. So we can see that even if there is some sort of rapprochement between the United States and China, which there absolutely, positively is not, they still have this issue with Australia, who is in the process of building a bunch of nuclear submarines that ultimately will, mark my words, have nuclear weapons on them. Putin's ally, Vladimir Solovyov, the guy with the show, the chief Russian propagandist, is basically saying that nuclear war is inevitable. But he says something even more scarier, why it's inevitable is because it doesn't necessarily entail the end of the world. He is saying, like I've been saying for a while now, that you could have a limited nuclear exchange. Many people think that it just immediately runs up the escalatory ladder. But what we have seen, I think, demonstrated over the last two years, really, that we all just presume that, okay, we're going to do something and Russia is going to immediately react. But that's not how things work in the real world, because of all of the interconnectedness of the global supply chain, number one, but because it's just a much more complicated and complex situation than I think the movies depicted. Okay, it's not just, okay, you fire at us, we're going to fire with a bigger gun at you, and it's just going to immediately run up the vertical escalation ladder. It's not so simple. And I think what this shows us is that there is room for a limited nuclear exchange that doesn't go full-blown Mad Max, which is contained to a small theater. Okay? And anyways, I'm not going to go into great detail about that, but essentially both him and other Western pundits now believe that that nuclear war is inevitable in some form. We also have September being recorded as the warmest month in history by a wide margin of 0.5 degrees Celsius. Okay, now that might not seem like a lot, but understand that 4 degrees is, the difference in 4 degrees is an ice age. Okay, so if the planet drops by 4 degrees, we get an ice age. If it increases by 4 degrees, we're talking about mass desertification and, just global chaos on a scale never before seen, and we're certainly heading there. We have record drought and wildfires in the Appalachian Mountains. Right now, there's wildfires currently going on there. Right now, today, in my neck of the woods, where it usually is around minus 10 degrees Celsius, it is plus 10 degrees Celsius. So we're about 20 degrees above average here today. We have a heat wave in Brazil. People are cooking eggs on the streets. Apparently, Elon Musk is in hot water once again. Twitter advertising boycott likely going to backfire, which is kind of silly anyways, because as much as people think that he's pro-Palestinian in some of the things he does, he really isn't. I mean, just remember going back before this whole thing started, the Netanyahu interview. It's like I'm the only one that remembers that, and I'm constantly bringing it up to remind people that things aren't as they seem, okay? And I actually think this whole Starship thing, there's something suspicious about that. There's something suspicious about this guy's ambition to go to Mars. Is that really what this is about? Let's save that for another day. I would still like to meet Elon and really pick his brain and see what's going on at some point. I don't want to completely burn that bridge, but I probably will before that time comes, because I'm very concerned that, the Tony Stark, as some people refer to him as, and you got to be very, very careful. Because isn't it funny how, the movies condition us like Batman? He's like the richest guy in Gotham. The elites are our saviors. And there's this messianic complex with Elon Musk with a lot of people that I don't fall for a second. And you just got to be very, very careful, because what you come to find is that Tesla cars, this robot on wheels, is an Orwellian nightmare in every possible way. The fact that they own Starlink, the fact that they got this boring tunnel shit going on, the fact that they're going to control space, that they can control the public forums with Twitter, or X as it's called, is just, that should raise some eyebrows. But this guy, tweets out some funny meme and everybody thinks, aha, it's a joke, and he's playing video games and he's putting fart buttons in the cars, and everybody thinks that, oh, this guy is our friend, and, he's got our best interests at heart. I don't think so. But, and I don't even think it's necessarily his fault. I don't think it's his intent. I think he's just, he has his own preconceptions and biases as a result of his upbringing. But it's more so to the fact that he's a nerd in a world run by gangsters, okay? And at the end of the day, he's got to answer to these gangsters. And you can see that every time they rattle his cage, he sings like a canary. So I have a feeling that the same will be true when they call on him to turn the key of this turnkey totalitarian world that awaits us. Guys, capitalize on that Black Friday deal. It is, I'm not sure how long I'm going to let it go to. I'm probably going to let it run till next Friday at midnight, but that's, you know, lots of this stuff is not going to last that long, so get it while you can. 15% off store-wide. We don't do any gimmicky shit where we raise the prices and we discount one item just to bring you into the store. I don't got time for that. Everything about my business is, you know, domestic. We don't oversee any sort of aspect of the business. So when you call somebody, you talk to somebody here in the building. I'm not sure how long we're going to be able to do that, the way things are going with the Amazon takeover, but we're going to do it until, you know, the bitter end, until the wheels fall off. Honestly, my life would be a lot simpler if I didn't even have this and I just did daily updates every day, but I guess I'm a sucker for punishment, trying to get people the good deals and the good products, because I hate having to be on the defensive like this, because it comes off as being defensive when I say things like, the reason why I have this business is because I want to make sure that people get high quality products. I could easily bring in products that have a much better margin, that are much lower quality, that are going to fail on you when you need them most. But when I do that, it sounds like I'm trying to, I don't know. It just sounds like I'm trying to, it sounds like a grift almost. I get it, but it's not, because those companies, I'm not going to mention any company names because I don't want to get sued, but there's a lot of them who just play on people's ideological, political leanings. And here, I'll put it this way, all right? Everybody's trying to sell you something, no matter if it's an idea, if it's a product, if it's their experiential view of the world. Everybody is trying to sell you something. If they're saying they're not, then that's almost the most dangerous people, because they're trying to sell you on some kind of an idea or some kind of agenda. Now, I'm very clear with what we try to do here at CanadianPreparedness.com. It never was my intent when I started a YouTube channel. Here I go on a big rant. But, you know, it just turned out that, you know, we invented a product called the Bug Out Roll, and then people were like, hey, you should sell the stuff that you put inside the Bug Out Roll. And we're like, okay, we'll bring in a few products. And it just kind of built from there. And I started to just want to create a store that had all the things that myself would use. So this is not like, you know, a UFC fighter promoting Burger King, you know, a product they would never use. These are all products that I specifically use, okay? And this is maybe a bit of a childhood fantasy in a way, to be able to, or not a childhood, but in my early prepping days, you know, I'd be thumbing through the catalog and I'd see all these cool products that someday, you know, I wanted to buy. I never would have thought that someday I would actually be a distributor of those products for people. So, you know, there's a bit of that to it, but you can trust that the products we are selling at CanadianPreparedness.com are top notch. This is not something that I have to do to, you know, to get by. So really at this point in time, like I say, it's almost just, it's not really the most lucrative thing, to be brutally honest, but we do it because, quite frankly, I care about my employees. I want to keep them going. I want to keep them employed. And they have lifestyles now that they've built around having a job here, and we pay them very well. And so, yeah, you know, I wear my heart on my sleeve when it comes to this business. But that's what you're going to find in this business. The people who are like myself, who have the best intent with what we're trying to do, seldom have the best marketing gimmicks and capabilities, okay? And a lot of it is market saturation, and that's what a lot of these companies go for. And they'll go to every single YouTuber. If you're hearing every single YouTuber promote the same product, you better double check. And this is not throwing any shade on YouTubers. There's a lot of YouTubers that are just getting started. These companies reach out to them and they're like, hey, we'll send you this, or we'll strike this deal for commissions with you. And, you know, I totally get that, but you really just read the fine print. Do your research. Don't do anything in haste. There's a lot of options out there, and there's still a little bit of time. So get it while the getting is good. That was much longer than I ever thought it was going to be, guys. Thanks for watching. Canadian Forever out.